Hi, I'm Esther.
And I'm Sean.
I write about AI news here at TechTarget.
And I edit Esther's stories.
We're here to talk to tech experts about everything AI, from open and closed models to AI agents and who's ahead in the generative AI race.
And even the elusive AGI.
We've got it covered, right, Sean?
Yep, we've got it covered. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Targeting AI podcast from TechTarget Editorial. Our guest today is Greg Pavlik of Oracle. He's Executive Vice President, AI and Data Management Services for Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. Greg's responsible for strategy, service definition, applied science, and delivery across Oracle's cloud portfolio with a focus on AI for enterprises. This is Greg's second stint at Oracle. Before this, Greg was Chief Product Officer for Hortonworks, a former big data software company that had an open source approach based on the Apache license. And at Hortonworks, he helped create the on-premises big data business back in the early stages. So thanks for being with us today, Greg.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. So before we get into the technology stuff, I just want to ask about your educational background. You had an undergrad in material science and applied engineering. Can we assume that's like hardware oriented? And then you also had an MBA. Did that help prepare you for the software business?
Well, the materials science is basically solid state physics and physical chemistry. And to be honest with you, I got into software by accident. I took a job where we were supposed to be working on developing high temperature ceramics for satellite nose cones. And I got there on day one. They were like, well, you could do that, but we really need people to help write software for a spacecraft simulation environment. And would you be willing to do that? So, and we'll pay you more. So I said, well, okay. I'm not really a software guy, and they offered to, put me through a master's in computer science as well. So I kind of just jumped in and started coding and did some graduate work in computer science, and one thing led to another, and here we are. Now, the MBA, I was at Oracle at the time. That was the first stint I was at Oracle as an architect. And, I wanted to get more into not just the technical aspects of product development, but also the building out the business side of the equation. And I thought that the MBA would be helpful. I guess it was. I don't know. It was interesting. And there were some things in there I think were valuable, but it was 2 years of working full time and going to school full time, and it was a lot.
I bet. So let's jump into it. We're going to start with Cohere, maybe the most recent chapter in your AI journey. So how has Oracle's relationship with Cohere, for everybody that they're the independent generative AI vendor, how has that relationship evolved since Oracle invested in Cohere as part of a $270 million funding round in June 2023? I have to ask you, how much was Oracle's contribution? You may not want to say, but I hope you do. And, and whether does Oracle plan to invest more in Cohere?
Yeah, so I can't comment on any non-public financials, but I can comment on the relationship. So, we have made a decision to really partner deeply around the foundation models. What we're looking for are companies that are experienced with creating high-quality generative AI models, number one, but as importantly, I should say, companies are interested in enterprise. And specifically business solutions. Because if you stop and think about where did these things all come from? Research communities in academia, search focused companies, social media focused companies, all good stuff, and all resulting in powerful advances in the field. But the problems that they're trying to address and the patterns that they're going after are not the same problems and patterns that you see in sort of typical business applications or solutions and workflows. And we realized this kind of early on when we started to look at these partnerships. We were taking models and we were applying them in the context of our SaaS portfolio, in the middle of workflows for human capital management, for supply chain management, ERP and financials. We're using the models and realizing that they were trained for other things. And so the advantage really of having a deep partnership is that we're able to sit down with the foundation model providers and look at the evolution of the models themselves, because they're not really static, right? A company will create a model, and then they'll continually retrain it. They'll create new versions and updates. And as they're evolving the models based on whatever requirements are being fed into them from their own core businesses, we kind of see our role to come in and proxy for the enterprise user, proxy for a number of verticals, and then try to move the state of the art in the technology base closer and closer to the kinds of patterns and the kinds of scenarios that are important for enterprise users. That's been very successful for us. I mean, when we started, we found gaps, we found holes, we found patterns with the first generation Cohere models. We worked with them on the data sets they were applying during training. We worked them on the preference tuning, instruction tuning, even in pre-training data, and we've been able to make the models just better for businesses. We'll say one thing. One of the reasons we really like the idea of open models in the ecosystem is it also gives us more access to start to look at how we push the evolution of the models, again, in the direction of what will work well for enterprise scenarios, what will work well in a vertical context.
Thanks for that, because our audience is enterprise users, so that's awesome.
Yeah, that is the key challenge, right? Like there may be, say, a dozen different quality large language models in existence right now, but very few of them have really taken enterprise as the core focus. And there's just, there's domain understanding, there's very specific requirements in terms of formatting and outputs, prompt understanding. I mean, you go through layers of challenges. And so having the ability to really lean in and force the evolution of the model in the direction that matters for our business and for our customers' business is actually the key problem today. And we've also, one other point I'll make, we've stopped looking at the models as kind of point in time snapshots, and we really do think of them more like evolutionary organisms. They're all benchmarking and doing well on benchmarks and kind of leapfrogging each other. And that's all good. That's all important elements of progress in the field. But we have come to the understanding that really these are things that are going to continually evolve. And, one of our main functions, one of our main value adds, honestly, in the market is to help the evolution in the direction that makes them useful for businesses.
That's very interesting. I wonder then, what would you think has been the evolution from popularization of, ChatGPT till now? How do you think the different models in the market have grown or shifted, and do you think they've shifted in the right direction?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's clear that the quality of the models has improved and continues to improve. So just their ability to have a better understanding of prompts, do better instruction following, the behavior around summarization, or even control of output length based on instructions. These are all things that the models have gotten better at. If you look at the public benchmarks, you can see that the models are continuing. It's almost like an evolutionary arms race. They're continuing to make progress. One thing that's clearly true is that we have more powerful models today than we did a year ago. One thing that's not always noted, but I actually think in some ways is as important, is that the models are not only getting to be more powerful, but they're getting to be more efficient. Right, so we've had the emergence of maybe mid-sized models that are able to execute on par or close to on par with the frontier models, but they're orders of magnitude smaller. And the significance of that, it's hard to underemphasize the challenge that is faced today generally for businesses, right? Which one is the model good enough, right? Is it able to do the kind of workloads I need, right? And that's improving, so that's good. But the second big challenge is how much am I going to spend to run these things. And a lot of times, like with GPT-4, for example, companies would go and they'll do a bunch of prototypes, they'll get good results, and then they'll get their bill, right? And then it's like, oh my God, so let's retrench to something else. The emergence of a newer generation of more efficient models is been really important trend in the market. So, for example, with Cohere, their Command R model is a 35 billion parameter model. With fine tuning, it can often get proximity to GPT-4 performance on a number of use cases, but as significantly, we can run it in a single GPU. So the economics of serving the model for inferencing are also orders of magnitude cheaper than what we were seeing, just I don't know, 2 quarters ago, 3 quarters ago, for models of the same quality. So this price performance trade-off, or this price performance ratio, is I think one of the things that's driving end customer adoption. And on both dimensions, we're seeing big improvements happening, very rapidly.
One more question on Cohere. I wanted to just say, like, what do you think? I guess, what is the benefit of Oracle and its customers of using generative AI technology from a third-party vendor rather than perhaps developing it itself? And what percentage of Oracle's large language models and AI agents, including those in OCI, are based on Core's technology?
The advantage for us in terms of partnership is that we were able to get into the game immediately with high quality models, right? Because to build these things from scratch and build out a team, it just takes time, right? It's time and expense. So from just a pragmatic perspective, coming in and working with companies that have world-class science teams, already have at least 1 or 2 generations of base models built out, it just gives us a quick on-ramp to be able to really get into building high-quality solutions. And if for Oracle, when it comes to actually delivering generative AI capabilities, there's 2 dimensions that are important for us. So one is at the level of platform services. So if you come into OCI, you can come in to use the OCI generative AI service. You can use our agentic platform, and you get these capabilities kind of out of the box, curated, turnkey. It's easy to get going. We also deliver generative AI across the application, our SaaS application portfolio. And if you look at the SaaS portfolio overall, Fusion Apps, NetSuite, there's about 22 different vertical businesses that we have applications for. In the aggregate, we've got the largest SaaS portfolio on the planet. So all those apps are plumbing in generative AI capabilities into their core workloads, and they're all building on top of the same generative AI services we offer to our customers in OCI. What's interesting about that is, of course, it helps us, all that pressure to make the services more efficient. But it also goes back to the earlier point I made, which is where we can work with the vendors and improve the models based on the workloads we're seeing in apps. In many cases, those are the same kind of workloads customers have in their, in their own bespoke applications, in their own business workflows that are running completely independent of the application, the SaaS applications. So you kind of get this double benefit where we can give people high quality generative AI driven solutions that are more or less turnkey, right? And they can accelerate and get efficiencies in workflows and applications they're already using now. At the same time, we can make the models better, and then we can make the models available with those improvements to our customers so that they can apply generative AI, wherever they need to in the broader enterprise context. It's worked out well from that perspective. Percentage of I should mention, if you go into the OCI generative AI service, we have Cohere models. We also have meta models. We've kind of taken an approach where we're not trying to give a model garden with everything under the sun. We have different mechanisms you can use to deploy any model you want easily. But in the truly managed environment, we really have tried to narrow the aperture or the lens on the market space and put models in there that we have a high degree of confidence will work well in the enterprise scenarios, and where we have a relationship with the company that's providing the models so that we can continue to make them better over time. as we put all this pressure on it from within the SaaS world or within our customer applications. So now,
Do you
as far okay, go ahead.
I was gonna say, do you have like a gauge? Like, how would someone know or an enterprise know it's better for me to use Cohere or it's better for me to use Meta? Like, how do they determine that, or is it just a preference of like just use whatever
Yeah,
you want and figure it out?
it's a hard question actually to answer. The reality is the public benchmarks are useful for comparing models in terms of their progress on specific dimensions the benchmarks look at, but they're rarely indicative of how they'll perform in production scenarios. We have our own evaluation toolkit and suite that we use internally that we kind of try to make judgments across the models in the market and how well they perform when we really try to put them in through production workloads. But I think customers often struggle with this. And one of the problems I see right now is we've got a set of customers we'll go talk to, and they're taking a dozen models and they're constantly putting them through tests and benchmarks, and they're spending a lot of money doing it, but they're not coming around with like any final decisions like, okay, we're going to bet on this model line and we're going to take it into production and actually drive value for the business. So we've been trying to steer away from that and, like I say, limit the I don't want to say limit the options, but really provide curated experiences that we think are being tuned for these kinds of scenarios that most businesses are looking at. And then, we will work with the customers individually too. If there's open questions about, well, hey, do we want to go with Cohere R plus versus Llama 405B? There's trade-offs with that. And we'll give them our experiences and also, work through them on kind of what's, the cost factors involved with those as well.
Okay, so you guys are not all in on generative AI, but definitely a major piece now with Cohere. Before generative AI really emerged in a big way for enterprises and consumers a few years ago, I mean, you still were working with AI. We call it now traditional AI, right? And so,
Yeah.
how did your strategy evolve from that old school way, that AI predictive or analytical, whatever, and machine learning into generative AI? And how did you decide when to get into generative AI? And did you just like jump into it, or had you been thinking about it already?
The investment we've had from Oracle Cloud perspective on the machine learning front goes back a long way. And then Oracle, even within the context of the database, it's literally decades long investment on the ML side of the equation. One of the things that we created out of that was kind of a common infrastructure that we run all of our businesses on for serving machine learning algorithms, either directly into a customer application or within our own application portfolio, within our own SaaS portfolio. So we wound up with a lot of experience about in understanding how to integrate, productionize, and maintain models over time in real world applications. When generative AI came along, we used the same machinery and the same infrastructure to do the hosting on the models. So that actually wound up being fairly straightforward. The big change for us around generative AI was actually less on the inferencing and using it in the applications, and it was more at the base infrastructure level or IaaS business. We had developed a technology for ultra low latency networking across a large number of GPUs. Came out of our early investments on clustered databases, and then we evolved it and applied it in the HPC space. And when generative AI started to become a real thing in the market, we really went into that full stop. We went after the generative AI training side of the equation with what we call the OCI supercluster. And those have become enormous business for us, but in many ways they've become, the preferential platform for generative AI training in the industry. And, customers, they run the gamut from XAI, NVIDIA, OpenAI, through, I think, about 40 the private equity backed startups. So I'd say the the biggest inflection point for us was really scaling the supercluster technology and getting that into a position to really provide the market with the best price performance environment for doing training of these models. Now, that also had another benefit, which is when these generative AI companies become customers of ours and they're training on our platform, it's often easier for us also to work with them collaboratively on the progression of the models. So, for example, Cohere is also a customer on OCI, and so when we look at how do we evolve the models, how do we shape the training of the models, how do we engage from a preference tuning perspective to improve the behavior of the models, it tends to be easier as far as a working relationship goes if they're also running on OCI like we are.
Interesting. What would you say is Oracle's approach with like AI agents? What do you guys consider AI agents, and how do you do your data? Like, how do you make sure that your data is secure?
The agent situation is pretty interesting, right? So I think the topic of the day is the most popular thing everyone wants to talk about is generative AI agents. And if you look at the way, and again, you don't have to go back very far, go back 9 months, right? The agentic models were really based on this approach called React, which was assume that the models would apply reasoning to generate a plan, and then they'd be reflective about the execution of the plan as you move through the interaction with the user. There's some amazing POCs for agents where you can set them up with tools, ask them to do tasks. They'll find information. They'll use that information in combination with your instructions, and they'll go book trips or hire people and so forth. The difficulty is it actually turns out that the large language models reasoning capabilities are not reliable. And so you get some great POCs, but then you would also get these agents that were successful, 60, 70% of the time or something like that. Whereas, if it's a mission critical workload, you need to be successful all the time, right? So that gap turned out to be enormous. We sort of stepped back and looked at it, and we had done a lot of early research work on applying the React pattern and agentic development. But the conclusion we came to is rather than give people a kind of a toolkit that was built of parts that when you put them together would never work reliably, we really went after it from a different perspective, which was to build agents for specific tasks where we could control and put guardrails in place so we knew they worked reliably. So, for example, maybe last quarter, we released our retrieval augmented generation agent, which allows you to do kind of a turnkey configuration of the agent system so that you can point it at a database or point it at a open search cluster and just talk to your data, right? We're doing some similar things with natural languages SQL. We have a thing called Code Assist, which is really around developer productivity. We're working with our application teams to plug in agents within the context of the apps. Again, where we've got targeted scenarios, we know they're high value, we know will work reliably, and we can provide to our end users so they can have these kind of multi-turn conversations to accomplish tasks or get access to information successfully, but without going off the guardrails. With these end-to-end scenarios where the models just aren't currently at the level of reasoning and planning where we can put them in production for arbitrary scenarios successfully. Now, the models I expect over time and the science will adapt and change, and of course we'll make adjustments with that, and we'll open things up so that people can build on our own agentic framework as well. Same technology we use to deliver these turnkey, more solution-oriented agents. But we don't want to get ahead of the curve when it comes to the enterprise users, because once you put something out there where people play with it, they like it, but they can't really get it to work, you lose a lot of credibility and a lot of traction. And we want to build on the momentum we're seeing with the adoption around generative AI keep people getting the successful outcomes and really high return on investment.
You mentioned earlier that you guys don't really have the model garden approach, or maybe even Bedrock and Amazon. But so you have meta models, Cohere models. So I wanted to ask you, how do customers access other models if they want to, which you mentioned?
Oh, yeah.
And how did you choose Meta as your non-Cohere main partner? Since Meta, I get that it's an open technology. A lot of people are using it, but you don't normally associate Oracle and basically an enterprise-only company with Meta, which is consumer focused, except for its foundation models.
Well, the Meta situation is interesting. So let me address that first. We started working with Meta primarily in research capacity. So some of my applied research teams were working with the models because they were open. And we were doing things at that point like trying to hack the context windows and manipulate the weights. And a lot of it was kind of internal R&D type projects where we were trying to push the limits of what the models were capable of that were in the market. And the openness of Meta really was attractive from that perspective. That then we started developing a relationship with the Meta team, and that relationship it deepened, and they had come to a conclusion that if they really wanted the llama models to be ubiquitous, the enterprise side of the equation was going to be important for them as well. So we started to get into deeper collaboration, scenario-based collaboration, and so forth. So it kind of blossomed from early research and development type efforts into something that was more of a holistic approach to the technology. Again, in the direction that we were interested in seeing it evolve from our customer base. So that was I think serendipitous set of events that played itself out really well, and now we've got a great partnership with them, and I think we're meeting with them regularly and really working with them in terms of providing them insights into the scenarios that are most important to us and to our customers, and they're very much engaged in helping the Llama model family to move forward with those inputs. So it's turned out to be a very productive relationship. And I expect, and I've talked to Zuckerberg, et cetera. I expect to see this continue, into the future. So kudos to the Meta team. I think they're doing a great job, and I think the realization they have that yes, the consumer space is obviously fundamental to them, and they should indeed need to focus on that. But the realization that if you really want the Llama models to be ubiquitous and to kind of become an open standard, you have to incorporate the business context as well.
Speaking of Meta and open, so I wanted to know what is Oracle's stance on open source versus closed source AI models? What is your open source strategy? Do you have an open source strategy?
Open source is a funny term. It really comes from the coding community. And if you think about it, like the last company I did was Hortonworks, which was one of the pure plays in the big data space. So we worked with the Apache Foundation software and created a Hadoop distribution, right? Kind of a big data platform. And there, all the source code was open source. It was all ASL licensed. It was all in the Apache repos. We would pull it out. We would apply patches and do hardening and packaging and so forth. And then we had support around that. The world of generative AI is a little bit different on a couple dimensions. What we have now are open architectures and open weights. We don't quite have open source because you can't go back to the repos and build it yourself. What's missing is the data, the training data that gets assimilated into the weights. I'd love to see that. Also, I'd love to see the full, true open source. In the traditional coding sense, materialize. But we're really in a what I would call open model, and that really is the architecture and the weights. That's still very, very powerful, and we can do a lot with that. Community can do a lot with that. Researchers can do a lot with that. So we're very supportive of that trend. And one of the reasons that we're actually both Meta and Cohere have open weight strategies right around their models. So it was a factor in our decision to work with both companies. Was that degree of openness. There are limitations in terms of what additional retraining you can do. So if you try to get in and do continuous pre-training on the open models, it can be very disruptive to the model behavior. We're trying to work with the partners too to find ways to do deep verticalization all the way down to the pre-training level, while successfully either reapplying or at least accounting for the fact that the changing of the weights can change the behavior, can cause forgetfulness, catastrophic forgetfulness or behavior changes. It's an important dimension of the equation, but it's not the central. It's not really the central problem today. So I think that the openness overall is a great thing. The more open, the better. We're very much receptive to partnerships that do revolve around that level of transparency. Now, the second part to this is Oracle strategy overall. I think as a company, if you look at where Oracle is today and go through the cloud services, we have a lot of open source. Obviously, a lot of customers are coming to OCI to use the Oracle database. But we have Postgres, we have MySQL services. If you're going to do applications, there's Kubernetes, and you do containers. It's all this Kafka-based services. So there's a tremendous amount of our business is centered on open source. I would say it's been a evolution of the industry when it comes to the hyperscalers. There's almost a base expectation that the platforms are friendly to and embracing open source, and Oracle's obviously been a part of that. I think the same thinking applies with the models. We will make it easy to use open models. We'll make it easy to use truly open source in terms of traditional machine learning. There was an earlier question about, well, how do users go and use models that aren't a part of our curated managed service? We have what we call the OCI Data Science Service, which has got really easy uptake capabilities. We call them quick actions to deploy models. You can just hook up the Hugging Face, grab any model, deploy it in the environment. And that sort of gives an example of, not only are we trying to make it easy to use open source across the board, but when it comes into the AI segment, we are also giving people turnkey capabilities to deploy, any model they want, with a big focus on the open source community as a whole and the open model community.
Okay, so Greg, can you talk about the OCI generative AI service? So what can it do for customers, and is it at all similar, or how does it differ from, what I would call similar platforms from AWS, Google, and Microsoft, the hyperscalers? Just talk a little bit about that, please.
One of the services, the managed services we have for using generative AI is the OCI generative AI service. We had a few design decisions we made early on there that I think were important. One is that we would never touch customer data. We won't intercept prompts or responses. We won't share them with our partners. If you're doing fine tuning, all that data is private. Same thing with any derivative models. Their basic assumption is your data is sacrosanct. It belongs to you. And we treat that with the same kind of guarantees around privacy and security that we do when it comes to the Oracle database in the cloud. It's just we're there to provide a service and capabilities, and part of the service and capabilities is to protect your data and protect your data's privacy. The other thing that we did was create a concept of a dedicated AI cluster for models that customers can deploy, so they have private inferencing endpoints. This is a bit different than, for example, if you're using, say, GPT-4 on Azure OpenAI, right, where there's an inferencing endpoint, but what happens with the data and the background management of GPUs is can vary quite a bit and is kind of divorced from your experience. Here, we allow users to fine-tune models and deploy them within their own networks. It can be in a private network endpoint, secured with all the cloud security controls and IAM policies, and then that private model, is predictably available with latency guarantees. The underlying GPUs are pegged to the model, so you don't have to worry about conflict with tenants, et cetera. So we were thinking about these as like core enterprise attributes, right? So people need predictability. They need to understand throughput. They need to understand that there are privacy guarantees and security guarantees. So all that was kind of built in day one. As kind of our core value add to the market. Now, the other thing we did again is we kind of looked at the space from the standpoint of how would we actually make sure that we're giving people reliable generative AI capabilities, and that's kind of what led to the curated approach, where we're a lot less focused on putting in that environment any model that's out there, and a lot more focused on validating the models and then bringing them through our own production processes, our own hardening processes, and then making that benefit available directly to end users.
Interesting. I like how you talk about privacy, and I was wondering, do you think it is the responsibility of Oracle and others in order to ensure that safety, especially when you're talking about model safety or safety when it comes to enterprise data?
Yeah, the data side of the equation, I mean, for us, it's kind of in our DNA. I mean, actually, one thing that's interesting with OCI, this is a slight digression, but in some sense, from day one, one of the driving requirements was to build a more secure cloud. OCI was created later than AWS or Azure, and in some sense, it does give you like a true second mover advantage. So even when we looked at like compute and networking, we did our designs differently. We had this notion of, for example, off-box virtualization in the compute design, so that we were decoupling the cloud controller software from the actual compute elements that the client's code is executing on, or the client's virtual machine is executing on. So we built an architecture where we kind of put security first into the bells of the cloud implementation itself, and then as we move forward, we kind of extended that same kind of thinking up through the layers of the stack. So when it comes to data management, or even when it's come to the AI side of the equation, we really put the security requirements up there as kind of like a primary consideration. How do we think about this, not just differently, but specifically in a way that's going to be more protective of our customers' data, and allow us to give them the assurance that this is a reliable platform that they can trust to bring their data assets into, for overall data management, but also for artificial intelligence. And that's been, it's been a big driver for the business, especially because one of the earliest workloads that was coming into OCI from the enterprise side of the equation was absolutely data management. So lots of Oracle databases, fleets of Oracle databases that have moved into OCI, and one of the drivers there from a decision standpoint on the customer base is security. Obviously, we want to make sure we're maintaining that when it comes to then using those data sets in conjunction with our AI capabilities.
Okay, so Greg, before we close out this podcast episode, roadmap question. What's in the future for Oracle and generative AI and even machine learning?
We are going to continue to deliver a number of new agents, right? And I think you're going to see them be available both directly in OCI. I think the one that's getting, the most excitement right now from a lot of customer engagements, surprised me a little bit, actually is the natural language to SQL agent. We knew the RAG case was going to be very important, and even with our own internal use cases, our own internal IT, RAG has been probably represents a majority of the implementations that we've done inside OCI, and we're seeing similar things with customers where it's just obvious value, fairly quick to deliver that value. But of course, Oracle has a huge amount of customer data under management that's in structured data sets, and the natural language to SQL scenarios have become, I would say, second only to RAG, and maybe they'll supersede it as we move forward into production. We're in early stages now, limited availability, but we're seeing a lot of interest in the natural language to SQL agents. A lot of hard problems there. Obviously, you have to have a semantic understanding of the schema, and a lot of organizations with complicated databases with long lineages, they don't even have people that understand them anymore. So helping to get the AI models to be able to decipher the intended semantics of the schema and reverse engineer that potentially from queries and so forth has been one area we've been looking at. But also it's just a general problem of ambiguity. The relational calculus is mathematical expression, so it's precise, and humans, we're not so precise. So dealing with ambiguity and that ambiguity in the context not just of semantic intent but of the precision of the relational calculus has been a big challenge. And then the other end of the agent equation is more and more agents will be coming out in the apps portfolio that'll be kind of an integrated part of those experiences, and those are just such a powerful gateway for organizations to get started with generative AI. I mean, one of the here's a core pattern maybe I'll leave you with. A lot of CIOs are getting pressure. A lot of CEOs are getting pressure from their board. Hey, tell us about your generative AI strategy. What are you doing? How do you get started? And, very few companies are out there hiring applied scientists, nor should they. But if you come in and you're using, say, Fusion applications and you can just turn on generative AI powered features, well, all of a sudden you're accelerating core workflows and getting the power of generative AI really without doing any work and without any upcharge. So it's kind of a stepping stone to show, an initial move in the direction of leveraging generative AI within core business processes. And then because it's the same, it's built on top of the same services, the same models, there's a lot of confidence then companies have to then move on into their own applications, their own workflows, and apply the technology more broadly. So the agents being a part of the applications, I think, is good in and of itself, but it's also, I think, another stepping stone to help people move forward with more sophisticated agentic scenarios in their own core business processes that they're managing independent of the apps.
Well, Greg, thank you so much for being on the Targeting AI podcast. We're really happy to have such a knowledgeable, articulate representative of one of our most important tech companies on the podcast, so we really appreciate it. And to our listeners, you can find this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all the major podcast platforms, or on the TechTarget sites. And you know where to find Oracle. So thank you, really appreciate it, and talk to you later.
Thanks a lot for having me on.
Thank you for being on.